The Grave Robber is one of the 4 starting heroes that you'll find playing in Darkest Dungeon 2. Out of all the 4 beginner heroes, she is arguably the most difficult to play with, at least initially. Her low health and seemingly inconsistent damage outputs can be off-putting to many new players, but if you know how best to utilize her, she can be one of the most dynamic, fun, and deadly heroes you'll place on your roster. In this video, I'll be covering all of her info and giving some tips on how best to play her. Check the timestamps for each section and enjoy. So, first thing we're going to go through is all of the Grave Robber's different abilities. Like every other hero in the game, she has 11, 5 that you get initially, and the rest of them which you unlock through the hero shrines. So we're going to go through all of her abilities, the base values, and the upgraded values. Do keep in mind that these are the pre 1.0 values. We do know that some of these are going to be changing for post 1.0, so keep that in mind that they're not exactly the same. So the first one we're going to look at is Pick to the Face. This is her base melee damage attack. This can be used from the front ranks, can hit the front ranks, does damage of 4 to 7, crit of 10, and it ignores block. That's pretty important. It also does a 50% crit chance when the target is comboed. When upgraded, it has a higher end range going from 4 to 10 damage, a higher crit value of 15%, and everything else stays the same. The next is her bread and butter attack. This is Thrown Dagger. This is her ranged attack, which you can use from the back 3 ranks and hit the back 3 ranks of the enemies. It does 3 to 5 damage, so not a super high amount of damage, but it does have a good crit value of 15%. Now, it ignores guard without anything additional to it, which can be very useful in certain situations when somebody like the woodsman is guarding a pesky enemy like the urchin and you want to remove them before they can do something bad. And when she is stealthed, it will ignore dodge. This counts for both dodge and dodge plus. The token just looks like the regular dodge, but it is both of them. This also has her crit at 50% when she hits a target that is comboed, and when it is upgraded, again, it just increases the end side of the damage, so 3 to 7 instead of 3 to 5, but the crit value does double, so it goes up to 30%, ignores guard, ignores dodge when stealth, and has that 50% crit chance added on, so it goes up to 80% crit rate when the target is comboed. The next we'll see is her Flashing Daggers ability. This is a pretty interesting ability, at least when she's using Venom Drop. It is a AoE attack, meaning that it hits multiple enemies. It can hit the ranks 2 and 3 and can be used from the back 3 ranks. Doesn't do much damage, 2 to 3 damage base, crit of 5%, and 3 to 5 damage when upgraded, crit of 10%. Really, the main value here is peeling off tokens, which is what it's mostly used for if you want to get rid of some dodge or some block, but especially on Venom Drop, it does have some more applications when Blight is applied to it. The next of her abilities is probably her most versatile, in my opinion. This is Poison Dart. This can be used from the back 3 ranks and hit all 4 ranks, which makes it very useful because she can hit anybody with it. It has low damage, 2 to 4, crit of 5%. Also does have the additional 50% crit chance when the target is comboed. The real benefit here, of course, is the Blight. It isn't much damage, but this can be really useful when you're trying to get a target to tick death's door or tick to death when they're at the end of their lifespan. And again, with the crit chance being increased here, it does mean that she can get a pretty good chance of getting the 5 duration damage over time instead of the standard 3 because of the increased crit value. When upgraded, it does 1 more damage on the high end and has a 5% higher chance to crit at 10%, but it does double the DOT at 4. The next ability we have here is her self-sustain ability, or one of them at least. This is Absinthe, which is a pretty interesting heal ability in terms of the game. So it is a 3-use limited combat ability, which means that it can only be used 3 times per battle. And basically what this does is if her health is below 25% at base, she will heal 33% of her health. But she can use this even if she doesn't meet the health threshold, because she can also get 3 dodge from this, which is a pretty large amount of dodge, and a speed token. She can use this at any time, even if she doesn't meet the health requirement. She just won't get the heal if you use it at that time. Now, when upgraded, it keeps the same amount of uses. The big difference here is that instead of regular dodge, you get dodge plus, which does make this much better for her self-sustainability, makes it a lot harder for her to be hit. So it is pretty useful, an ability to keep in your back pocket. The next ability we have here is one of her real interesting ones, and this is Dead of Night. Now, Dead of Night is an ability that allows her to remove a corpse from the battlefield and use that corpse to heal. So it's pretty interesting. It only heals for a little bit when non-upgraded, but when it is upgraded, it heals up to 50% and also removes 1 stress, which is pretty interesting. It also can stealth, and then when upgraded, it does a stealth of 2. This is also combat limited. She can only use it 3 times per combat, and it does require that there is a corpse here. This has a multitude of different uses. Of course, the big one being that this is a heal that doesn't require a threshold. She can heal at any level. It can give her stealth, which sets up a lot of her abilities. It can stress heal, which is super useful, and it can clear corpses, which in a lot of situations can get you out of a big issue if you're fighting an enemy that devours corpses, like the carrion eaters or any of the enemies in the fetter, for instance. So there's a lot of really good use cases for this. Next, we have the Glint in the Dark ability. This is kind of an interesting one. It's one of the few ranged abilities that can be used from the front ranks, so it's used from rank 1, 2, and 3, and can hit ranks 1, 2, and 3. Now, the big thing here is that it doesn't deal too much damage, 3 to 5 damage, crit of 5, but it does ignore stealth, which makes it quite useful in areas where there are a lot of stealth enemies. Specifically, of course, the biggest area there is the sluice. There are, of course, stealth enemies in most regions if you count the gaunts, but this is also the wharf rats and the shroud are pretty susceptible to this as well. Now, the big thing is that it ignores death blow resist, 20% death blow resist at base, and when upgraded, it does 20%, but also ignores death blow entirely when she's stealth. So that's the real big thing here, is that it can ignore stealth. When she is stealth though, and it is upgraded, this will insta-kill anybody on death's door. So this is really useful against bosses, basically, because sometimes you have some bosses like the Exemplar, for instance, which have a 75% DBR base, and they're very hard to kill even when on death's door. Using this ability, if she's stealth, will just remove that threat from the game. It's one of the, if not the only ability that I know of that actually allows this to happen. Next, we have one of the mainstay abilities of the Grave Robber, and that is her Lunge ability, which deals a fairly good amount of damage even when not upgraded, and it has a decent crit chance. Now, one of the biggest things here is that this ability moves her forward too, and also when she's stealth, it ignores block and ignores dodge, which makes it particularly powerful at getting rid of some pesky enemies, those tokens being some of the worst to deal with. It's usable from the back 2 ranks, and it can hit the front 3 ranks, which means it has some pretty good range, but this is really good for a lot of reasons. It does a lot of single target damage to an enemy, which can remove most small enemies from the game, especially if she crits with it. But also it helps position her for using some of her other abilities. So if you're using her in a dancing team, this is a particularly useful ability. Next, we have one of her other really fun abilities, which is Pirouette. This is another one of her cleave abilities, meaning that it hits multiple targets. It hits ranks 1 and 2 and is usable from ranks 1 and 2. It does a pretty good amount of damage, has a decent crit chance. It does have a very high cooldown of 2, which makes it that you can't just spam lunge and pirouette over and over again. But the big things here is that it will give you dodge and also daze when she moves back. So it does put her out of commission for a little bit in the sense that she'll have to go last on the next turn. But it is a pretty good setup ability for dealing a good amount of damage to the front 2 targets. Really, really good against a lot of frontline kind of squishier enemies that you might come against in a lot of mashes. It does move her back 3 as well, which again is really good for setting up some of her other abilities. Next, we have one of her, I would say, more interesting and nuanced abilities, one that I don't use too often, but I've seen people use to success, and this is Repartee. Now, this ability does require that she is stealthed. You can't use it at all unless she has stealth, so you're going to have a way of generating that through one of her other abilities or a trinket or something of that nature. But one of the big things here is that this will actually remove her stealth, give her dodge, and give her taunt. So this basically turns her into a dodge tank, the idea being that she will attract damage from other enemies and be able to dodge that damage, at least hopefully, so that she doesn't take it because she is pretty squishy. Now, when upgraded, this will actually give her 3 dodge plus tokens, which is really strong, makes it very hard for her to be hit. So it is a pretty cool ability. Again, it is very nuanced. And finally, we have another one of her more nuanced abilities, but definitely a very powerful one, and that is Shadow Fade. So this is basically probably the most effective way, well, definitely the most effective way to generate stealth on her, because it doesn't require having a corpse or having a trinket to do so. And essentially what this does is you use it, it will move her back 2, which is again good for positioning. We'll give her 2 stealth, which is very powerful because you get not just 1, you get 2, you get some more time to kind of use those abilities. It does have a cooldown of 2, and when upgraded, it will actually give you a speed token as well, which I think is actually really powerful because this is a setup ability, so you want her to go as early as possible the next round before enemies have time to kind of catch up, do some more damage, or set up their own abilities, get themselves with dodge or block or stealth or whatever the case is. In this case, you'll be able to go before them, and also a lot of her abilities synergize with that stealth, so it sets her up for a really strong attack. Okay, so now we've covered all of her abilities. Next, we're going to go over her paths, which make some pretty interesting playstyles for the Grave Robber. Now, like all heroes, she has the Wanderer path at base, which does nothing. Some heroes, it does do something, but on her, it does nothing, so this is her base kit. Next, we have the Deadeye path, which is kind of a focus on ranged skills. So essentially what it does is that it increases the damage and crit chance of all of her range skills at the expense of damage and crit on her melee abilities, or at least damage for sure. I'm not sure if it affects the crit chance on those, which is pretty okay. There's not many melee abilities that she has. Most of her abilities are ranged, of course, so this is essentially a pretty easy path to use for her. It feels very natural. Now, of course, the other thing is it does lower the move resist on her by 33%, making her very susceptible to move abilities. So do keep in mind that if you take her and use this path, you may want to have one or two of her abilities that help her move back and forth, or a team that can do that for her by moving themselves around, so that way she isn't as affected by those negative things. The next path that we're going to be talking about is, in my opinion, probably her most interesting path, and that is Venom Drop. So Venom Drop is a path that helps her focus on dealing blight, and what this does is it actually affects some of her abilities like flashing daggers and also her poison dart ability, and it gives her the ability to deal blight with flashing daggers while also dealing an additional 2 blight when she is stealthed. So this also does reduce her speed, so it does make her a bit slower, but essentially it gives her some options that help her effectively deal blight damage more. The other thing that it does do is when she uses her movement abilities like lunge and pirouette, it gives her a boost to her ability to deal blight to enemies. It gives her a plus, I believe it's plus 30% chance to deal blight to enemies. So if you use like a movement ability to set her up and then apply a blight attack, it is pretty effective at piercing most any enemy's resistances at applying that blight. Not normally a way that people would probably play the Grave Robber. They don't normally think of her as a blight dealing character, but this is a very fun path in my opinion and can be very, very powerful. We'll talk a bit more about that in the how to play section. And finally, the next path that we have is the Night Sworn path. This is her stealth oriented path, which is a fun way of playing her. Essentially what this does is it gives her an additional 50% damage when she is stealth, and it also gives more damage to lunge and pirouette abilities. Now, this is at the cost of her health, which of all of her stats is the one that she probably suffers from the most. She is very squishy. So this is kind of her glass cannon path, I would say. It makes her very powerful, gives her a lot of strength. I mean, plus 50% damage, especially combined with her ability to crit, is really strong. But if she gets hit, it's gonna hurt, and it's gonna hurt real bad, especially when she's at such low health. So do keep that in mind. Okay, so now we've talked about the past. The next thing that we're going to move on to is her unique trinkets. Like every hero in the game, she has 3 trinkets that are unique to herself, meaning that they can only be applied to her. No other heroes can use them, and you'll only see them on runs where you have her on your roster, so you will never get these trinkets unless she's on your team. The first one we're going to talk about is Foreclosure Notice. This is an interesting one that when she is in rank 4, she has a chance to apply combo when she hit, which is really powerful because she has a lot of combo synergies like we've talked about, and this actually gives her the ability to apply combo herself, making her less reliant on teammates. Another thing that is very interesting here is on hit when using flashing dagger, she has a 1 in 3 chance of applying stealth to herself. So this does make her effective essentially at dealing combo and also stealthing yourself. You can use flashing daggers for instance and basically try to apply combo to the middle ranks while also giving her the ability to self-generate stealth to set her up for more powerful abilities. Now this does come at the cost of giving her much less healing received if she's not stealthed. So keep that in mind, being that she is so squishy, it can be pretty painful when she takes a hit and then you are unable to heal her from much. So that can be a big detriment. The next one is the His Rings trinket, another fun trinket to play with her. Basically, when she crits on range skill, she has a chance to apply 2 blight. This is pretty powerful, again, with her ability to deal crits so reliably. This gives her basically ubiquitous ability to deal blight on any of her ranged abilities, of which she has many. This also gives her poison dart skills just a base 33% higher chance to deal blight, making it much more effective at piercing through any resistances, even in areas like the Fetter, where a lot of enemies have that high resistance to blight. This does have a detriment that if she is in rank 1, she will take an additional 75% damage, so you want to keep her in the back ranks. Again, her being so squishy, that amount of damage is going to hurt when it hits. And finally, we have the Stiff Drink trinket. This one has has kind of some nuance to it. At turn start, it will convert any stealth to crit, an 80% chance of that happening, so it's pretty high, making this kind of it's an interesting one because she does have such a high chance to crit base, but this gives her a guaranteed chance to crit if she has that token, so you can kind of make sure that you know that those crits are going to land and give stealth a different way of working. Now, that being said, this does mean that your stealth might be a little less useful for the other synergies that it has with the Grave Robber, because it will be converted, most likely, to a crit token at the beginning of her turn. Now, at the end of her turn, it will convert any speeds she has into days. It's unlikely that she will have speed at the end of her turn. There are only a few abilities of hers that actually, so like Absinthe can give her speed. So if you use Absinthe and she has speed, at the end of her turn, it will turn that speed into a days token. So it is something to keep in mind, because if you have that token, you might be expecting her to go first, and all of a sudden she's going last. Now, the other pretty nice upgrade to this trinket is that it gives a plus 50% damage to pick to the face, meaning that she becomes kind of a frontline powerhouse. That ability is already very strong, especially with its ability to bypass dodge base without any, additional things like stealth or whatever the case is. So it is a very powerful trinket. Okay, so now we've kind of gone over the basics of the Grave Robber. We've talked about her abilities, her paths, her trinkets. So next we're going to talk a little bit about her strengths and her weaknesses, at least how I see her strengths and weaknesses. Now, of course, take all this with a grain of salt. Everybody plays the game a little bit differently, but over my experience, these are the things that I found that she's good at and that she is bad at. And after this, we're going to talk about some ideas and recommendations, some tips on how to play the Grave Robber the most effectively, in my opinion. So as for her strengths, the Grave Robber excels really in her flexibility, her stealth, her blight, and her self-sustainment. Of all the heroes, she's one of the few that can play effectively from any rank, and is also one of the only heroes with the ability to move herself forwards and backwards with ease while also dealing good damage to the enemy. Many of her abilities synergize well with combo tokens, making her a crit dealing machine when paired with a team that can apply combo effectively. This means that she can be extremely potent at killing enemies while also helping maintain her and the team's stress levels with crit stress healing. Her paths give her a variety of playstyles, focusing on either increasing her range damage, her damage when stealthed or moving, or increasing her blight output heavily. Her self-sustainment abilities make her extremely survivable, giving other heroes the ability to focus elsewhere while she manages herself. She can become one of the strongest DOT dealers in the game, and is also one of the fastest heroes in the roster, making her ability to quickly remove nuisance enemies or set herself up for stronger attacks much easier. She can easily be one of the most potent and deadly heroes you'll use if played correctly. Now, she does have quite a lot of weaknesses as well, so where the Grave Robber truly does lose some wind is in her ability to deal high damage without the help of others on the team. While Pirouette and Lunge are both good damage dealing abilities, they're hard to pull off over and over, meaning you tend to rely on her dagger and pick attacks for primary damage ability, and the range on these makes these a little unreliable. She has a high chance of dealing low-end damage unless paired with combo tokens, giving her a much higher chance to crit. Since Audrey has no way of applying combo herself, at least outside of her trinkets, this means that she's highly dependent on a team that can apply it effectively. Her next major flaw is, of course, her low HP. Having one of the lowest health pools in the game, she is the definition of a glass cannon. Her stealth generation and her self-heals can help her in the game, but she can effectively be killed with a well-placed crit and a dot by the right enemy. And I'm looking at you, Exemplar. She also just requires a good amount of setup in general to make the best use of, requiring things like combo and stealth to give her the best chances of being useful. Overall, she has a lot of things that need to be balanced in order to make her play well. So what does that mean? How do I play her properly then? Well, let's go over a few ways that you can use her to great effect. One of the simplest ways to play her is as a dancing damage dealer. Starting her in the front ranks and opening with a pirouette can effectively remove or at least greatly damage the front two enemies in most enemy mashes. Considering most comps in the game consist of 4 single rank enemies, this can be used to great effect. Combined with someone like the Highwayman using Grape Shot Blast, you can use this opener to remove 2 enemy mobs with relative ease before the first round is over. Her speed here makes this much more viable, as she will tend to go before most enemies and other heroes. Combine this with her backline damage abilities like Thrown Daggers or a Poison Dart, and you can make her into a steady source of DPS to remove other enemies left over from your blitz attack. Another way to make great use of Audrey is to pair her with a team that can deal combo with relative ease. Combined with someone like the Occultist or the Jester, or heck, even the Plague Doctor, you can use her high crit chance to deal strong damage to almost any rank. Her flexibility with her attacks means she can hit all 4 ranks if you have the right abilities selected, and this means that no matter where the combo token lands, you can make good use of her. This can be aided with her use of Deadeye path as well, making her ranged attacks even more more lethal, increasing both her crit and damage for all ranged attacks. It does come at the cost of melee damage and move resist, but that is a small price to pay for when those massive crits land. It also helps to keep in mind that many of her abilities bypass certain tokens, making her one of the best heroes for dealing with both block, guard, and dodge. Some enemies can be extremely hard to hit, but not for a stealth grave robber. Her thrown dagger can bypass any level of dodge with ease as long as she's stealth. Pick to the face ignoring block also makes it one of the most useful attacks against tanky enemies, like the foot soldiers in the tankle, or the dreaded brigand cannon, the implication. Stealth plays overall make the grave robber feel much more powerful. She gets the ability to divert many tokens, become much harder to hit, and gains access to interesting moves such as repartee, which turns her into a dodge tank effectively. This can be of great use when you're trying to peel away damage from other heroes that are near death's door, and when fully upgraded, repartee makes it very, very hard for enemies to land their attacks, if at all. Make sure to make use of abilities like Shadow Fade and Dead of Night to help generate the stealth you'll need to make use of her abilities like this. These strats are doubly effective when combined with her Night Sworn hero path, giving Audrey a 50% damage boost when stealth. Just try to keep in mind she becomes even squishier when using this path. One of the Grave Robber's more overlooked skill sets is her ability to deal blight. Poison Dart is one of the most versatile abilities in the game, being able to be used from the back 3 ranks and being able to hit any enemy in any rank. The raw damage output of the attack is fairly weak, but it does get the boost to crit chance from consuming combo tokens. This means she can land a steady supply of 5-turn blights if used effectively. Not to mention her Venom Drop path turns her into a blight powerhouse, giving her a huge boost to blight dealt while stealth, and also giving flashing daggers the ability to blight. While at first that low 2 blight on daggers may seem weak, when the ability is upgraded and the Grave Robber has stealth, she can apply 6 blight to 2 enemies at the same time. This makes it one of the single most potent damage over time attacks in the game. Combine this with the His Rings trinket or any of the other blight trinkets like Noxious Ring, and you've got yourself one of the best DOT heroes in the game, bar none. Take that, Plague Doctor. Finally, it pays to keep in mind just how survivable the Grave Robber is with her built-in self-sustainment abilities. Dead of Night is one of the most versatile self-heals in the game, granting stealth, health, and stress healing when fully upgraded, all while removing a pesky corpse. This can be of great use when you're trying to move a backline enemy out of position or stop a lord from gobbling up his dead compatriots and healing. Keep in mind though that this ability loses all of its usage when fighting bosses, as they do not generate corpses, so it's always a good idea to keep a backup ability in mind to switch out for, so you can keep all of her ability slots filled with a useful button. Always have useful buttons. Absinthe is also one of the best heals in the game, but it can be used even before the heal threshold is met. This means that if you feel like an attack is coming her way, you can easily apply dodge while also setting up Audrey to go first the next round with a speed token. Again, this means that her heal is useful in more ways than purely getting her off low health. Overall, the Grave Robber can definitely be a hard hero to manage. She requires more forethought and babysitting than the other heroes do to make function, at least the beginning heroes like herself. But don't sell her short. With good planning, she can become a madhouse of crits and damage, taking down even the biggest of opponents. Her ability to dance back and forth is super fun. It's one of my favorite ways to play the game. It just feels fluid and it feels enjoyable. Give her a chance, and I think you'll find her to be a hero you take more often than you might have thought initially. So, thanks for watching this video. I really appreciate you being here. If you like this kind of content and you want to make sure that you catch the rest of the guides that I'm making for this series, do consider subscribing to the channel. Definitely check out my Twitch stream where we go through all this stuff a couple times a week and play through the game many, many times. So, again, thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video and have a good one.